Hello and welcome to Culture Over Coffee, a podcast focused on improving company culture and fostering employee engagement. Every week we chat with experts and thought leaders about the latest information and proven practices you can use to reduce regrettable turnover, increase productivity on your team, and retain key customers. So pour a cup of your favorite brew and join us. I'm your host, Beth Sunshine, SVP at Up Your Culture and the Center for Sales Strategy. In this episode, we're kicking off our season-long focus on the role company leaders play in building and nurturing a thriving culture of engagement. Throughout our fourth season, you'll hear from leaders in various industries who truly embody the fact that a great company culture starts at the top. Today, I'm joined by Jason Randall, CEO at Questco, who is here to help me break down how to successfully shape your company culture by developing and arming tomorrow's leaders. Jason brings so many great points to the table, like why no matter how positively you talk about your organization, if your culture isn't authentic, you won't be fooling anyone. How everyone has a role to play in nurturing a company's culture, but it's up to leaders to continuously shine a light on what that culture should look like. And finally, why new leaders in the company should be trusted and empowered to make their own decisions. All right, well, welcome, Jason, and thank you so much for joining me today for Culture Over Coffee. Been really looking forward to this.
Well, me too, Beth. So glad to be here.
So your company, Questco, has actively focused on hiring and developing top performers for a long time now. So we've had the opportunity to work together in that arena quite a bit. Recently, we had a conversation about the importance of maintaining a strong company culture and highly engaged employees, especially when a company is in growth mode, which of course is really why I'm so glad you're here today. I know you have a passion for building exceptional teams. I know you're always thinking about performance improvement, which is why this conversation just had to happen. So thank you again for joining me. Are you ready to get started?
I sure am.
Okay, good. So let's start with just a quick brain jolt. I want you to envision the very best company culture that you can think of and tell me maybe 3, 4, 5 handful of words that you would use to describe that ideal culture.
So I think, first of all, it's important to establish that there is no one ideal, perfect culture for every human being and also every business opportunity, right? What might work for a school may not work for a creative agency or a military contractor. Based on what the organization is looking to accomplish and how the right culture sort of emerges from those business needs. That said, I think there are some commonalities across culture because at the end of the day, we're all human, right? I think there are certain things that much more often than not promote this healthy culture. So what I think of are the words you asked, like 3 to 5, right? So like authentic, empowering, empathetic, data-driven, and decisive. Even regardless of context, if you're embodying those qualities, you probably are on the path to a really good, productive, healthy culture.
I love that. So do that one more time. Authentic. I remember data-driven. Fill in the 3.
Authentic, empowering, empathetic, and decisive.
I love it. You really span the spectrum there from the authentic and caring and nurturing to the data-driven in making decisions. I think that's terrific. All right, good. Good way just to launch our conversation.
Sure.
In preparing for our conversation, I read a few of your blogs. I've actually read a number of your blogs even before this, and they're very good, by the way. I especially enjoyed one that pointed to a strong company culture as the best retention strategy that a company can have amid high turnover. Don't know if you remember writing that blog. It doesn't even matter if you do, but in that piece, you shared some key strategies that business leaders, you said, must commit to in order to successfully create a thriving culture that engages their employees. And that just got me thinking. So let me ask, how big of a role do you think business leaders play in establishing the company culture and in driving any culture initiative? And why is that?
I think it is not only helpful, it's vital, it's essential for leaders of all levels within an organization, and most definitely the senior most leaders to really embrace culture as not something to overcome or to tolerate, but instead to actively promote. Said other way, think of the opposite. If our leaders are not behind the culture that is promulgated, is talked about, again, back to authenticity. It isn't authentic. It will not feel as so. You're not going to fool people. And as such, it will not be successful. And then it gets to, well, why does culture even matter, right? Which is, I guess, a slightly different question than what you asked. But depending on the business, it might matter to a disproportionate extent or just to an average extent. But in every context, every situation, culture, which I would use as a shorthand, it's a way to scale humanity, right? And thus scale the impact of the individual. That is a vital, essential link across any company. So the senior leaders and leaders throughout the organization need to live that, embody that, and embrace that to be successful.
I like that definition for culture, scale humanity. I'll probably steal that at some point
Go
in the
ahead.
future. I'll give you
Small
credit.
royalties. We'll work it
I'll
out.
give you credit, but I'm going to use that. But I also, interesting to hear you talk about how from the very top, there needs to be buy-in, but not even just senior leaders. You then said all leaders. So everyone really needs to be in lockstep, I think you're saying, in order for a culture to thrive.
And it might be unrealistic to say literal lockstep, right? Where individuals, we think we might interpret things and filter them. I would say more aligned than lockstep in that, yes, I think that's absolutely important. And perhaps you've been in an environment in the past where, from the top comes one message, but what you're living day to day, your boss might be giving a different message. And how does that feel? And how does that make you feel about the organization? In my experience, it feels really badly. And I tend not to believe it. So then go to the opposite. On the other hand, if the message is consistent, if it's aligned, if we're living our values at all levels, well, then you have something really special, and that culture has come to life, and it can actually be used to achieve business results, as well as just be a healthy, wonderful place to work.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I love that you emphasize the importance of any single manager. The entire company could have a mission, vision, values that everyone feels really committed to, purposeful about. But if you have one manager who isn't in alignment, the pocket of people that work with and for that manager, they are going to start feeling, kind of siloed, a little out of touch, not connected with the organization. Interesting point.
Yeah, sure. And you asked about managers and leaders, but I would say teammates, everyone in the organization. Something I like to say is that culture. You're not a consumer of our culture. It's not something that happens to you. It's something that you yourself nurture and internalize and promote. And we all have the ability, regardless of our station, to be a part of that. You're either working toward it or you're kind of working against it. So this is something that I should really emphasize, that this is not limited to leaders. This is really everyone in an organization has a role to play in promoting the healthy culture in an aligned way.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. The leaders really are responsible for sort of shining the light on where we're going, really maybe holding the torch a bit higher, but every person, every hire a company makes either adds to or can potentially just detract from a culture. Each human being joining that organization, it sends ripples, it influences the outcome. So yeah, very good. So it sounds like we both agree it's impossible to have a thriving culture if your leaders, at least, we are kind of extending sort of everybody, but if your leaders aren't highly intentional about it every day. But here's where it gets a little tricky. Creating a thriving culture is not something most people learn in school. The vast majority of leaders have actually never had any formal training to be able to do this work, and yet they are really key to success. So in your experience, how can a company set its leaders up for success here?
Sure. Well, I guess one small point to make is that you're absolutely correct, and that most have not had the benefit of formal training and culture, or might even really know where to go to look for that. It is available, and it's out there, and certainly some graduate leadership programs cover this, some social psychology classes cover this. But again, to your point, most of us haven't had that. I just wanted to make the point to the audience that there is rich material out there from an academic sense, a practical sense, to really bring some of these concepts to life and do that in a setting that might be more safe. Right. But in addition to that, the fundamental point you're making is, of course, completely valid, that most of us are, to the extent we've even had leadership training, we probably haven't had cultural awareness. Why is this important in the organization, let alone how to do it? So then what do you do? Right. That's the question.
Right.
It all starts with, you'll probably hear me say this several times in our brief conversations, defining what that culture is, and as importantly, why it matters. Just a little context. This is certainly not a commercial for my organization, but we handle outsourced HR for small and medium-sized businesses. So they come to us they basically want a lot of HR issues handled, whether that's administrative tasks or more responsive HR tasks. And so the culture that's right for us is a culture of a caregiving organization, right? Because these business owners really want these things handled. They expect us to handle them on their behalf, be partners by them. And we can't hope to be the caregivers externally unless we are that ourselves internally. And so culture comes from that fundamental belief and insight. And I would hold that beliefs drive behavior. And that's one of the reasons why culture is so important, right? So it has to be said by this as often as possible, by as many as possible. Hey, this is what we stand for, what we're all about. And here's why. Here's why it's important, because we can actually tie it. It's great to have a culture for its own, call it intrinsic human benefit. It's just a more pleasant place to be. But culture is actually more than that. There's a business purpose to that. So if it's more of a command environment, there may be less flexibility. If it's a more human-centered, flexible environment, well, then that's reflected in the culture. But defining why is essential for people. So then how do you grow? You start with that fundamental understanding, and then you give opportunities to demonstrate these values, right? You're continuing to emphasize that. You're right, Beth. I might not have learned it in school, but I can see it practiced every day. I can see it reinforced, rewarded, incented, and recognized. And there is no grand gesture that makes a culture happen. It's everyday behaviors consistently over time in an aligned fashion that will make a culture come to life. And that's how you can pass it on and get leaders into that aligned set of beliefs. I guess one other point, because it's such a rangy topic, right? Is that you need to recruit and retain and promote those leaders that are aligned with that cultural vision, or you will without fail be working against your own culture. And we've all had that sore thumb moment with a manager in an organization where, you know what, that person doesn't really seem to be living our values. And there's this cognitive dissonance that happens. It's really important to recognize. So all of this is, hey, let's recruit the right mindset that buys into this fundamentally. Let's give them opportunities to demonstrate that, and let's celebrate it when they do.
So we both know that not everyone is cut out for management. Even some of the most talented people in the marketplace are better aligned with other roles, not coaching people, developing other people. So sort of dovetailing on what you were just saying, first, how do you identify potential future leaders within your organization? So specifically those who will be able to grow their direct reports, but also enhance that culture, ensure that it thrives, grow the company overall. So I'll stop there and ask you that question first. How do you spot those people?
Yeah, this is probably the answer to this is probably a dissertation that I'm not qualified to write. It's such an important question, right? How do you make that happen? In our context, we've nearly tripled in size in a short number of years. Part of that is through acquisitions or a blending of cultures, right? So, oh my gosh, what a Herculean challenge, and something that we wrestle with every day is we face a lot of situations where people have been, the management opportunity has been created by the growth. And so, okay, this is what we have. And that's one situation. Others have come from the outside, bringing in their own sensibilities about this. So it's this big melting pot to blend in to a culture. So again, it does start with firmly standing for something and repeating that so frequently that everyone knows it. A line employee 3 states over should have a similar thing to say about who we are and what we stand for than someone at headquarters, right? If you're accomplishing that, you're doing this right. And so when it comes to leadership, what do? You give, I think the question was about culture, but it's also how do you advance leaders, right?
That's right. Essentially, how do you spot them? How do you task the right people with this responsibility?
So I think this comes, first of all, with giving an environment of safety. Let's take incremental chances on a human being to do, say, accomplish, and so on. So maybe it starts with anything from a T-shirt design to planning an event to owning an initiative with rather minor stakes. Give them an opportunity to show what that is. That tends to expand over time. You give feedback, you reinforce, whether it's about culture or a more tangential culture, performance-related accomplishment or not. Give feedback. Allow many stumbles, because that is how we learn. And in fact, I think a healthy culture, I don't know if it's one of my words, but would really embrace the failure contain it, but give that an opportunity to create future growth. I think there is no such thing as free tuition. And a lot of the times the lessons we learn are paid for by the pain of those mistakes, the consequences of those mistakes. Let's minimize the damage that can be caused and then give people free rein to do that. And if you're doing that, you will enable that emerging leader to build a confidence in herself, in himself, and continue to move forward. And then, of course, as I mentioned, this is probably a dissertation level topic, but just a few thoughts that come to mind.
You had mentioned a little bit ago how important it is that you feel like caregivers, that you behave as caregivers, that's one of the ways that your company identifies itself, your people must identify themselves. So I assume that's something you specifically look for when you're hiring people, certainly leaders. Are there other specific traits or qualities that you look for in leaders in general?
So there has to be a technical competence in the subject matter, because so many of our areas, whether it's benefits or payroll or HR advice, you wouldn't want a leader of HR advice that doesn't know anything about HR best practices, right? So there has to be a technical domain that's solid. But from there, a lot of it just depends on there's a personal fit aspect to these things that's so crucial, and it tends to be a little minimized or reduced to colloquialisms. But what this fundamentally means is this a person that's able, within the dictates of our unique culture, able to thrive? In other words, like in our case, we don't want people that would call people out in a negative or embarrassing way in public, right? That should be handled in a different way. But there are other organizations, other cultures where that is appropriate. Well, if you mix those things, you're going to have some bad results, even though the individuals involved, they're not necessarily wrong or bad, they're just incompatible. So we would look for people that have a similar sensibility that's demonstrated. And I would actually say that's one of the things that while job interviews have many challenges, this is something that can emerge pretty apparently in a lot of well-constructed interviews is, hey, are you culturally appropriate? And that is not to say that everybody must think the same. In fact, quite the opposite. I believe that diversity in every context, including diversity of perspective, is so critically important. And we do strive for that as well. But it's how you disagree and how you raise differences and succeed together. And so, yes, that is something that's very important to us, is to recruit on those factors and then to reinforce them and correct it when we're out of line with the culture as well, because this is not a one-time thing where we're interacting.
Yeah, we used to talk a lot about culture fit, hiring people who are culture fit, but then that was often misconstrued into we need to hire more people who are like us, who think like us or look like us or act exactly like us, when in reality, I think most of the time we're talking about hiring someone who's more of a culture add, that whatever it is they bring fits very nicely with the mission of our organization, with our core values and how we treat each other. So that's really what I'm hearing you say. And I love the fact that a moment ago on a previous question, you had talked about sort of the concept of psychological safety and how that leads to innovation and improvement. And now you're talking about diversity of thought and having, all of those different, people in the think tank making things happen. I think I'm really understanding what you're saying. You need people to come with all their own unique talents and personalities and insight, but they also need to be the kind of person who would enjoy your mission and live by your values and really align with what you're doing. Did I get that right?
I think so. I'd even take it further that, hey, to the extent that everybody looks, sounds the same, agrees with each other, you're probably losing a lot of value, because there's a homogeneity of perspective there that is inherently limiting. I love that at Questco we have a variety of racial backgrounds and geographic backgrounds and professional backgrounds mixing, that we can have contrasting viewpoints and get something better accomplished because we bring those to the table. Yeah. That is a very different concept than saying misaligned culture. I would say when you have the approach that, yes, we want divergent perspectives to come together with a shared sensibility, that's when really magical things happen in an organization.
I love the way you just capped that off. Beautifully said. All right. So what are some of the strategies you would recommend that company executives use to develop their future managers to set them up for success and help them become great culture leaders?
Yeah, this is hard, and honestly, we struggle with it. We continue to struggle with this because it's inherent in a growth environment, right? A lot of times you have people that on one dimension or another are underskilled, right? In terms of some of the technical aspects of leadership, it is a big jump to go from
It is.
managing a smaller area to suddenly your success is achieved through others, and obviously the culture we're talking about, this notion of being decisive, being empathetic. That's central to a leadership discussion, of course, as well. It is hard to get people into that different mindset because in the short term, it's always easier just to do it myself than to trust someone that's less experienced than me to handle it. But that's the only way you can grow is through that delegation. So first of all, make sure that's a clear expectation is, hey, I expect you to, the person supervising that leader, managing that manager, I expect you to not do, but to teach, to coach, to train. And let's make sure that's an explicit expectation. How do you inculcate the culture in a leader? Again, this is repetition and consistency of behavior, and then there's some skill set upgrading that has to happen. And boy, this is tough, right? This is a tough right fit thing because I don't know that any organization exactly. It's hard. You might be too small to have the right internal training mechanism, or these are hard things to solve. So I can't give a generic answer other than be devoted to finding that answer and improving over time because you probably won't get it right away. And it's an iterative process to get there. But I guess it comes down to devoted management attention to this issue of leader development. And maybe maybe the hair on fire issue in a particular organization might be the technical training of how literally to manage people. For others, it might be, well, you know what, we kind of have that, but we need to emphasize how we broadcast cultural harmony throughout an organization, and how do we manage through disagreements? Some of the things we've sort of touched on, little glimpses of here. So it's being intentional, it's being consistent, and it's being methodical inside of that, and that's where good things happen.
I love that. And as you continue to grow, as you continue to hire or acquire, all of that good work has to keep happening. And like you said, it's not a one and done. It's really, I think we started out the podcast by you saying something to the effect of it's the little things that happen every day, all the time.
Sure. So, I guess one more point I'd make is, hey, don't be afraid to ask for help. Again, I think you made the point. A lot of us don't study this in school. Well, you know what? There are resources out there. There are consultancies that can help, of course, as I believe you're aware about the help through, cultural development and advancement and growth. Don't be afraid to have the humility to say, hey, you know what? We could use some outside help to lead us through, whether it's a time period or an organizational upskilling. That help can be available and just need to look for it.
Yeah, you're right. And even if people know what they want and they know what they need to do, sometimes it's hard to stop down in the pace of business and actually do it. So that is where that comes in handy. Thank you for mentioning that. All right. So are there any common challenges or roadblocks that you've encountered in leadership development, specifically developing others? And if so, how have you overcome them?
It is different things at different times, right? But I would say something that I've seen a lot of is it can be very challenging for people that are assuming a leadership position for the first time to feel comfortable owning the decision and doing the thinking. They're used to perhaps teeing up a case for someone else to decide, or even less than they'll bring inputs and just say, what do you think? Not even a recommendation. And I would say that is really challenging to say, you know what, that is not, that may have been sufficient in your previous role. It is not sufficient in this one. In fact, we need you to own this, and you might be wrong and you got to suffer the consequences. So how do you overcome that? Again, very specifically spelling out, like I just did in this short exchange, here's what is expected of you. And I think honestly, there are other leaders in my own organization that are probably better at this than me, of saying, hey, here's sort of the pathway to success in your new leadership position, and let's put this on paper. Let's review it. Electronic paper probably more often than not now, and let's make sure that we are being very specific about what good looks like, and let's follow through on that consistently. Let's review it all the time. and make sure you're tracking. And these are things that I don't think come as a huge revelation out there. This is not a magical new idea, but I would say this is something where the execution is much more important than the brilliant strategy. Making sure that people know what is expected of them. We all want to do good jobs, right? So helping define that, giving that clarity, and then over time, encouraging them to create that clarity themselves. That is a discipline and a skill that can be taught and therefore learned.
I agree. And I think a big part of that is communication. A lot of times people believe they are being more clear than they are being, or showing more decisiveness than they are demonstrating. So I agree. And a lot of times when I've worked with organizations, what we really center on there is communication. So interesting. Okay, I have one last question.
Sure.
If you could recommend only one thing, and that's the hard part, I think, only one thing for all company leaders to start doing right away, people who are listening, who are walking away thinking, boy, Jason had a lot of really great things to share, and man, my head is swimming with all of the things I want to do. If you could leave them with one thing that you'd recommend they start doing to improve their company culture today, what would that be?
I don't know how you can improve it before you define what improvement looks like. So again, I'm sure there's a big temptation to give a multi-part answer here and dodge the essence of the question. I would say you have to start by defining what a good culture looks like for you. You know, the world is full of best places to work awards. We have a whole bunch of them in a trophy case ourselves. But really, for your organization, the best place to work for your people is different than the best place to work for mine. Right? So define what that looks like at a very detailed level, and then a very succinct level so it can go out. So basically, you are defining the target, because without that, you will have very little chance of achieving it.
I love it. And you're not just talking about what is the culture you want for tomorrow. You're actually talking about define who you are today.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. I would say, look, that's in the eye of the beholder, right? Whether you're going aspirational with it, or it's like, you know what, I want to capture what's here because we think it's working pretty well. Regardless, what does that mean? Because best place to work for Beth might be very different than the best place to work for Jason. I don't think it is, but it could be. And let's make sure that we're defining something that's, again, aligned not only with the human values, but with our company goals. I think that's a missing link a lot of the time, is that, you know what, by itself, culture is not its own reward. It needs to translate to a larger business goal, and make sure you have the culture that works for you. And that starts with the definition.
We're going to end it right there. That was excellent. I loved this. Thank you, Jason, so much for the time you spent talking about culture over coffee with me today. And as we decided in the beginning, neither of us are drinking coffee. So culture over non-coffee together today was really terrific. I think you shared, boy, a lot of great information and ideas related to shaping culture by developing tomorrow's future leaders, and in a variety of other ways. I think our listeners have probably found a lot of value here. So for those listening, I'm going to drop Jason's LinkedIn information in the show notes so you can connect with him. I'd highly recommend it. I'm also going to add a link that you can use to grade your own company culture. There's an interactive quiz that I think you'll enjoy. It only takes a few minutes, but it gives a really good sense of the current health of your culture while you're in the process of identifying who you are, what your culture is, defining it. This can really help you. So, and it provides recommendations that will help as well. So thank you, Jason, so much. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, Beth.
Thanks so much for spending time with us on Culture Over Coffee. If you've enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe and join us for every episode. For more helpful information on the topics of company culture and employee engagement, visit us at upyourculture.com. Enjoy the journey as you increase engagement and up your culture.